I decided yesterday to help my father move into my grandmother's house. My parents are currently going through a nasty divorce, and my mother has taken all of his money and sold the house. He was kicked out the day after the divorce was announced. My mother tried to keep us from my dad by telling us how horrible and awful he was. Neither of us liked my mother, and she's a compulsive liar, so it was a bit of a no-brainer that we would help him with everything. My grandmother's house has 3 bedrooms and a large basement with a crawl space and storage room. My grandmother is the sweetest and kindest lady you'll ever meet, and was super happy to have my dad living with her again. My grandfather had recently passed away from cancer, which is a horrible bacterial infection. He essentially bled out through his intestines after they burst. We were all able to say goodbye to him, but it was still a horrible death. We will never forget the smell of a GI bleed, the amount of blood one can lose, and the sound someone makes when they die. He had cancer which exacerbated the C. diff, and made it impossible to treat. For months before he died, my little cousin, 11 years old, my aunt and I had nightmares about a large black figure coming to take my grandfather away. The figure was always in the basement, and it was always laughing menacingly. Whenever any of us would visit, we would avoid the basement unless someone else came down with us. All 3 of us have had paranormal experiences in the past, and we believe we are sensitive about these things. The thing in the basement terrified us more than anything. I had a similar nightmare the day after he passed. However, the figure already had my grandfather in its grasp. I hadn't been back to the house for about a year after he passed. The night before we went into the home to help my father move in, both my boyfriend and I had a terrible nightmare about the basement and the figure in it. I can't describe the primal fear that was elicited from the laugh of the creature. We went nonetheless. We arrived around 10 AM and spent all day unpacking the moving truck and getting my dad settled. We had dinner around 6 PM and I was asked to unpack some things in the basement. My boyfriend went with me and we took down a bunch of boxes. The whole time we were down there, we felt as though we were being watched. It didn't help that my grandma has a collection of Anne of Green Gables dolls and various other porcelain dolls in the room where we were unpacking. About a quarter of the way through the first book, one of the dolls fell off the shelf onto the bed. We put her back up and tried to shake off the nervous feeling we had. We kept hearing thumping noises from the storage room next to us, which developed into banging and pounding. My dad came down to see what the noise was all about, and just as he entered the basement, the pounding knocked another doll off the shelf. His face went pale, and he told us to come back upstairs. As we were headed up the stairs, we heard laughing from the storage room. This made us all bucket up to the kitchen. My grandma heard the laughing and said, "Just ignore him, he'll go away." This made us even more nervous, especially when she wouldn't elaborate. We were watching TV and getting ready to leave when we heard a loud bang in the basement, and my grandma asked us to check it out. She'd been having troubles with a boiler and thought that was what had banged. My dad, my boyfriend and I all went down slowly and very tentatively to see what the issue was. We opened the door to see a mess. All of the boxes and jars in the storage room were tossed about, and in the middle of the room was an old-looking Ouija board. My dad grabbed my arm and pulled me back, and shut the door as quickly as he could. He stormed upstairs and confronted my grandma about why there was a Ouija board in her storage room. Apparently, she's been trying to contact my grandpa. She was hearing and seeing things that she thought were signs that he was trying to talk to her. So, she got out the board that my dad and uncles used to have and tried to talk to him. The only problem was that my uncles and my dad had a terrible experience with that specific board when they were in college. They'd been hit, scratched, their room had been destroyed, and they'd heard evil laughter. They'd done the Ouija board in the exact room it was in now. My dad explained this to us as we kept hearing things being tossed around downstairs. He said that he recognised the board, and that they had burned the board over 35 years ago. My grandma's face began to drop as she understood that this was definitely not Grandpa. We then saw a large black mass gather at the bottom of the basement steps and slowly rise up towards us. We all scattered and ran out to the various exits of the house, away from this thing. My grandma was inconsolable because she finally realised that it was not my grandfather, and because it felt like it wanted us to do us harm. My grandma has lived in the house for 50 years and has raised 3 boys there. She's never experienced evil the way it manifested like that. By 9 PM, we were all tired and ready to go in the house to try and get my dad and grandma settled for bed, so my boyfriend and I could head out. We didn't have enough room in our apartment to bring both of them to our place, and we didn't want to leave anyone alone, so they decided to stay together upstairs, and we'd leave our phones on in case they needed us. We headed inside and I went to the washroom. In my grandma's washroom, there was a large teddy bear that used to be my favourite toy when I was little. It would laugh and sing to me, and it was super cuddly. It was sitting above the medicine cabinet, parallel to the toilet. As I was finishing up business, I heard demonic sounding, electronic laughter coming from this teddy bear that hadn't worked in 20 years. I looked up towards the thing, absolutely terrified, and saw its head turn towards me suddenly. For reference, this bear never, ever moved. There were no animatronics in this bear to enable it to move. Even the stitching on the head of the bear should have made it impossible. I screamed as loud as I could above the noise of the laughing, while this thing's head kept turning from side to side. The old oak door to the bathroom had locked on its own and wouldn't budge no matter what I did to move the deadbolts. My boyfriend ended up breaking the door down with my dad. The teddy bear continued to laugh maniacally for about 20 minutes before my grandma finally chucked it outside. My boyfriend and I got the heck out of there, and I don't think we'll ever go back. I called my aunt and told her everything that had happened, and she told me she had a nightmare the night before about the demon figure in the basement eating me alive. I told my dad this, and he convinced my grandma to contact the local parish to do a blessing on the home. I've had my fair share of experiences with the paranormal, but this thing was utterly evil and powerful. I'm very concerned for my dad and my grandma's health and well-being, but there's nowhere else for them to go. My dad's divorce left him destitute, and my grandmother's other son owns a home and refuses to let us sell. From her reaction to the entity, I'd say this has been going on for a while. I believe she invited whatever it is in because she thought it was her husband. She may have even ignored everything, believing she was going crazy, until we all experienced it with her. It was left her emotionally unstable, knowing that it was something else, not Grandpa. Meanwhile, my boyfriend and I are shaken and a little scarred from that experience. We can only hope it didn't follow us home. To get some facts, I was an exchange student, small belt, and I lived in an apartment on my own. I'm also an extremely heavy sleeper, meaning that my neighbours would blast loud music, and my other neighbours have their loud TV right behind my bed, but I never woke up because of the noise. Mind you, the story might not seem as scary to some, but being someone who has never been in such a situation, it was definitely a freeze or flight moment for me. I originally come from a big city. Not too crowded, but pretty big. It's always been safe in my city to anyone. You rarely hear about break-ins, even though it's always busy. However, in the States, I lived in a really small town. A college town, basically. Very quiet and sleepy all the time. The area where my apartment was located wasn't the fanciest, but it also wasn't the sketchiest. I've never feared for my safety in there. Until that day. I needed a nap, and it dragged longer than I intended it to, so I woke up around late sunset. Towards the end of my nap, for some reason, and remember I'm a very heavy sleeper, I was half asleep and half awake. It was getting dark already outside, so there was not much light to alarm me at the time. If anything, I was closer to being asleep than awake. I kept hearing sounds from the wall where my apartment door is, which also happens to be the same side of the walls where my bed and the window are. In the beginning, being myself, I thought I was dreaming. I was still half awake, and I thought it was one of my neighbours doing something. But then the scratching and noise kept going for about a minute. This is when I became fully awake. I sat on my bed and paid attention and quickly realised that this scratching noise was someone outside my door. I gathered every single bit of courage that me and my whole ancestor had and walked closer to the door. Thinking about it now, I probably shouldn't have. Now I identified the scratching sounds were coming from my doorknob or lock. The sounds of when someone tries to insert a key or a card to unlock the door and get in. Except that this person clearly didn't have a key to my apartment. I kept getting closer to the door, only so I could look through the peephole. There was this old man, white beard and white hair, dressed in all dark clothes, with a couple of shopping bags sitting next to him. I've never thought so rationally, or irrationally, in my whole life so quickly. I've never been that brave. I mean, who can a 5-foot girl do with zero self-defense knowledge, right? All that I learned that day is, unfortunately for a smart girl, my response was fight. I took a couple of steps back and ran to the door and kicked it as hard as I can and growled at him. You'd think he'd run, but he didn't. He just picked up his bags, turned his back, and went downstairs. To make sure I'm safe, I reported it to the sheriff's office. The lady on the phone told me that it might just be an old man who's lost, but why my apartment though? She told me there was a couple of incidents of the same nature that were reported the previous week. Then, to double check, I talked to my neighbours downstairs who have a clear sight of whoever gets up and down the stairs, and they hang outside their apartment a lot. So when I confirmed with them that they said they saw him once on the opposite side of the apartments, but never sure if he lives there. I always wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt. He might just be old and lost, but what if it wasn't that way? It could all just be a good disguise. Plus, I'm the only single little girl who lived in that building. I can't stop thinking about it. How if he meant harm that day? I probably dodged a bullet. The story takes place in the early 2000s, about 15 or 16 years ago. This was a time when it was still cool to spend a few hours at the mall, hanging out with your friends, and basically just bullshit. We were 13 or 14 at the time. My friends Beth, Mary and I had been dropped off at the mall. We spent our time doing various shopping, walking around, meeting friends, and eating and chilling in the food court. This was just a normal day for me hanging out with my friends. Until it wasn't. After spending a few hours at the mall, we decided to call it quits and head back to Mary's house for a sleepover. As we headed to the glass door exits, a man, who seemingly came out of nowhere, was walking towards us and stopped in front of us. We stopped maybe 5 or 7 feet away, and my friends and I exchanged a few confused glances. He was an older man, maybe mid-30s, wearing a long, light trench coat type jacket, which I personally thought it was odd given it was summertime in the Midwest. Nothing else particularly stood out about the man. He was just an average looking dude. But something about him just made me feel uneasy. Then came words out of his mouth that still haunt me when I think of this story. Hi Mary, you've been all over the mall with your friends today. Something didn't feel right, and we all felt it. Without saying a word, my friends and I booked it as fast as we could to the exit. After reaching outside, we stopped briefly to gather our thoughts. Beth and I asked Mary if she knew that man. She didn't. Mary said she'd never seen him before in her life. Panic set in at this point. Frantically, we called Mary's mom, who thankfully had already pulling into the parking lot to find us. We explained what happened, and her mom immediately called the police when we returned home. An officer came and took our statements, said they would put the word out and keep an eye out as well. We never heard anything after this. It still freaks me out to think that this man had clearly been following us the entire day without our knowledge. Even scarier to think that at one point, he was close enough to learn Mary's name. We had no idea the entire time. I'm a therapist, and while I was in grad school, I began an internship that provided group and individual counselling to our halfway house. This halfway house was run by a church and their well-meaning congregation, but it was a bit of a mess. After several months of working with them, I got a phone call from the house parent, They said that none of the residents were willing to attend group sessions if their new housemate would be involved. The house parent made some comments about typical house drama, so I wasn't too worried about it, and just told them to go ahead and bring the residents to the clinic, and I would work with the new housemate privately to figure out what was going on. I met with the new housemate first, and they seemed a bit reserved and untrusting, but nice. When I asked about issues in the house, they gave a small curved smile and raspy chuckle or scoff. I pushed them a bit further, but all they would say was that the others were scared. We ended our session agreeing to meet weekly. I had the group session next, without the new housemate, to get a feel with what was going on from the others. When I walked in, I could tell there was something seriously wrong. Their faces looked terrified, their general appearances were dishevelled, and they were all looking anxiously around at each other. I asked what was going on, but no one answered. They asked me what I thought of the new housemate, and I redirected back to them. The anxious eye contact continued. I asked them again and reminded them that change and growth couldn't occur without honesty. Finally, one of them started talking. Here is the story from that perspective. We were told that we were getting a new housemate, that we weren't supposed to have much interaction with, and that they wouldn't be there that long. No one would give us any info about why the new housemate would be getting the only private bedroom, or why they wouldn't be participating in classes or group activities. They just told us to leave them be. This went on for 2 weeks, and they started letting the new housemate hang out and participate in things. They would make some strange comments that would make us uncomfortable, but we would just ignore them. They wouldn't sleep, they would always leave their bedroom after they thought everyone was asleep, go into our rooms, and check to see if we were asleep by holding their finger under our nose. Then, they would leave and walk through the backwoods. They would always be back in the morning, and we would tell the house parents, but would be told to be quiet and not talk about this with anyone. One night after dinner, we turned on the ID channel and new housemate was watching with us. A few minutes into the episode, they got up and walked into the woods. Usually did this super late at night. A few minutes later, we heard it. The name in the episode. We couldn't be sure, so we went to the computer and checked, and saw that they had tortured and murdered several women. There's more details to the story that I can't share, but needless to say, my new client was a convicted serial killer that raped, tortured, and murdered at least 3 women in our area. This person was being let out on a technicality that affected several of the murders they were charged with, so got released early on the condition that they lived under supervision. This particular halfway house was being paid to hold this person until a more appropriate structure was in place. After I'd done my own research and confirmed, I went to my supervisor and professor, and the contract with that particular church and halfway house was terminated. Icing on the cake, the next year of my life was absolute hell as I was stalked, my home invaded, my dogs injured, my house and car vandalised, and several items that didn't belong to me were found in my attic that made it look like someone had been living there. I would come home and the house would look different than the way I left it. The police came to my house over a dozen times through that year and did nothing. So my family hired a security team and installed cameras. 6 months later, a perpetrator was arrested on my property, and eyewitnesses and evidence linked him to the crimes. The perpetrator had been out of prison for just over a year on rape and kidnapping charges. So yesterday my family had a borderline terrifying experience, and I'm worried it could become a problem in the future. It started out at 8 AM, with my mom frantically waking me up and asking me to look outside the window to see if I knew that guy. Looking out the window, I could see a guy, maybe late 30s, pacing around looking at our house, with a scowl on his face. I'd never seen him before. Apparently, the guy had come up to the door, which my dad answered, and the guy boomed, "Where's Mike?" Now, my name is Michael, and I often go by Mike. The guy seemed aggressive, and my dad had the door open like an inch, and he said, "What?" The guy explained that he had worked with Mike and his dad earlier, and he had an accident of some sort, and that he needed to see Mike now. Instead of acting confused and saying that the guy had the wrong house, My dad said, "He hasn't even woken up yet. You must have the wrong mic." The guy responded, "I need to look it up." And he walked away from the door and started pacing while using his cell phone. This is when my mom woke me up. When I told her that I didn't know the guy, she called the police, since the guy seemed really aggressive and possibly mentally ill. When the cops showed up, they talked to the guy and called EMS, since he seemed to be out of his mind. They asked him to call his dad to pick him up, and he started talking to his phone for a while, but they soon realised he wasn't actually talking to anyone. Finally, EMS showed up and used his phone to call his dad, who turned out to be a really nice old man, and informed us that the guy had paranoid schizophrenia. He refused care and to take meds though, so there really wasn't much they could do. His dad ended up giving him a ride anyway, but he still lives in some apartments around a block away. The police made a trespassing warrant, so if he does again, he'll be arrested, but I'm not confident that he won't be back. We still aren't sure how he knew me and my dad's name. I couldn't find any profiles for him on social media, and the whole thing was really weird, creepy. Let me know what you think. Anyway, I was 15 and had just transferred into a new school. I made a friend immediately, and after a few weeks, I asked my mom and she agreed to let me spend the night. I'm not going to give out my friend's real name, so let's just call her Kelsey. Anyway, I get to Kelsey's place and it's all fun and games. I met her mom, who I absolutely adore, and even managed to make a few jokes with both her parents, even though her dad seemed more partial to grunting. Around 10, we both got sleepy, and since I have a horrible memory, I didn't remember to bring something to sleep with, so I borrowed a shirt from Kelsey that went down to my knees. We also slept together in the same bed. I know, probably not a good idea to be wearing just a shirt, with understuff of course, to a sleepover, but I trusted my friend, and she was wearing something similar. We both passed out, but I woke up sometime later because I could feel the blanket moving. I turned my head and saw a shadowy figure. I could just barely make out to be her dad step back from the bed and drop the blanket. I blinked in his direction like twice and then instantly fell asleep again. Dumb, I know, but I was dead tired and too sleepy to be properly alarmed. I felt the same thing after I fell asleep again, and this time I didn't move too much around as I looked and verified that yes, that was my friend's father, and that he was lifting the blanket of the side I was sleeping on. My thighs were exposed because the shirt had ridden up when I slept, and I sat up, scaring him away from the blanket again. Yeah, it took it happening twice, but I finally caught on to what was going on, and to say I was scared was an understatement. I had a lot of shit going through my mind of potential horrible ways that could have ended. I made sure the blanket was around my legs and still acted sleepy because I didn't want him to know how aware I was. He moved away to the foot of the bed and stood by the TV, telling me some bullshit story that he was just there to turn it down or whatever. I just went with it. He stood there for like 3 minutes, just looking back to see if I would lie down again. If I was even thinking about it, the fact that he was waiting on it would have stopped me. Thankfully, he left the room, and I grabbed my phone and tried my hardest to call my parents. They didn't answer, because it was like 3 a.m. As I was trying to reach them though, I noticed that he never really left the hallway or bathroom space in front of Kelsey's door. He was still waiting for me to fall back asleep, and as such, poked his head into the room every few minutes. At that point, I felt sick. I was the most terrified I'd ever been in my life, because I suddenly realised that we were the only two awake in the house. I went on Snapchat just to connect people and not feel so isolated. I could have woke Kelsey, but I didn't. I was too scared, and I didn't want to lose my first friend, so I didn't bother to wake her up. I just stayed on my phone all night until she woke up, and I made her come with me to the bathroom because I was so nervous. If you're curious, I did eventually tell her what happened. She begged me to tell her mom, and I did, even though I didn't want to. She then came home with me and refused to leave until I told my mom. Together, they managed to get him out of the house, and Kelsey's still one of my closest friends to this day. And I'm immensely grateful of the fact that I'm a light sleeper. The only thing that woke me up those 2 times was because I could feel the blanket being lifted. It was such a small thing, but I'm so lucky that I woke up. He could have done a lot worse than look at me. if it wasn't for that. I've been working for a couple of years as a paramedic after I graduated from school. The place where I worked primarily was in the city, but our service area was in the entire county, which is very rural. When you're in school, you go on ride-alongs. You practice your skills with your preceptors on patients, very similar to residency or internship. Your exposure to the job is what you get while on those ride-alongs. Sometimes you get seriously injured patients and it's terrifying, because you sometimes don't always know what to do. You're still learning. But you have your preceptor at your back to protect you from any fuck-ups and guide you. Sometimes though, you don't get lucky enough to experience some of these horrible things. To some, that may seem like a good thing, but it's important to experience these as it prepares you for a time when you're all alone. There are a couple of terms we use, called white cloud and black cloud. White cloud refers to a person, either student or professional, who never gets the exciting, serious calls. The calls always seem to come when you were just getting off shift, or you left the area, or where the call came in. Now another ambulance takes it, and this white cloud can follow this person for any length of time. Black cloud is the opposite. When I was in school, I was a white cloud. I got a few cardiac arrests, bad accidents, things like that, but nothing that ever really stood out as unique. So a couple of years into my career, this white cloud is still kind of hanging over me. That's not to say I hadn't had bad calls before that. I have, but it's not the same. The day this story takes place is Christmas Eve. I worked from 7 AM Christmas Eve to 7 AM Christmas Day. From what I remember, the day was pretty slow. Most people are with their families, not going outside, getting into accidents or causing mischief. I was working with the charge medic at the time, and a brand new EMT who was going through his FTO, field orientation process, was with us. A few of my co-workers had made a Christmas dinner that day, so we all had hot food to enjoy while we had to work, and be away from our families. At our station, we had 2 ambulances there with 2 crews, myself, my partner and our FTO, and the other crew. When night comes, if a call comes into our station, the 2 crews just rotate calls so that we get to sleep a little bit more. It was around 11 PM and I was sitting in the recliner watching TV. A call came into our station that required us to respond out to the county. One of the guys on the other crew, who was a friend of mine, was asleep in the recliner next to me, so I took the call. The call was initially for a woman who had fallen and hit her head, but was conscious and breathing. Due to the nature of the injury, we responded emergent. It was probably about a 50-minute drive to get to the person's house. As we're getting close, dispatch informs us, now the PT is not conscious, but still breathing. As we approach the residence, driving down the street where this little development is, there were flashing lights everywhere. Sheriff's deputies, police, fire departments were all there. Even some blocking the entrance to the street. For just a simple head injury, we thought that was pretty weird, and it set a weird vibe for the call. One of the deputies saw us coming and moved his car, allowing us through. Once we got through, this part of the street ended in a cul-de-sac with houses all around it. People were standing on the front porches around, looking at what was going on. We arrived at the address. There's a vehicle parked in the driveway, still running with officers all around. The driver's side door was open, and there was an officer standing there and looking like he was talking to someone sitting in the driver's seat. I walked up first with my partner and our EMT FTO behind me. As I approached the rear of the vehicle, I see there is definitely someone sitting inside. There is also a man, middle-aged, in plain clothes, standing in front of the vehicle, his lower half lit up by the headlights. He has his hands in his pockets and is looking rather intently at the person in the vehicle. I walk up to the officer and get a report from him. While the officer tells me what's going on, I look at the person in the driver's seat. The person sitting in the driver's seat was a middle-aged woman, maybe mid-40s or 50s, sitting back with her head against the headrest. Her arms were hanging down by her side. I can visibly see her breathing, hear her moaning, but not talking. Her eyes are also closed. There's a bit of blood running from her head, past her cheeks and down her chin. There's also a small stream of blood coming from her nose. The officers tell me that she was inside with the family when she came outside to get something from the car. The officer says that the woman's husband, and gestures to the man standing in front of the car, came out to check on her because she had been out there for a while. When the husband saw his wife bleeding, he figured she must have fallen or hit her head or something, so he called 911. The officer tells me the woman has not been responding to him. I attempt to speak to the woman. She does not answer me, but continues to moan. I perform a sternum rub to cause painful stimuli and hope to get some sort of reaction. No reaction. I ask the husband if she'd been drinking tonight, or if she abuses any drugs that he knows of. He says that she's had a few glasses of wine, but no drug use. At this point, I'm thinking she has a head injury and potentially a brain bleed, but she's not responding appropriately. I stand where the officer was standing in the driver's side door as I'm performing my assessment. I can't see where the blood is coming from, so I figure she has a laceration or something in her hair that isn't visible. It's at this time that the officer comes up to me. He says, "We also found this in the driver's side door compartments." He produces a revolver. I look at the officer and look at the revolver. He looks at me and holds it out. I grab it and flip out the cylinder, and at the same time I'm thinking to myself, oh fuck. In the cylinder is one brass casing, with the primer indented, meaning a round has been fired. With this new information, and based on the bleeding, I assumed the patient had put the gun to her temple or something. The fact that she is still breathing and making noises leads me to assume that she missed, or the bullet miraculously bounced off if she held it at a weird angle. Due to the potential for significant head trauma, I decided that we needed to place a cervical collar on the woman, in case of spinal injury as well. I asked one of the firefighters to grab a collar out of our ambulance. I open the back door of the vehicle and get in behind the woman so I can hold her head stable while the fireman places the collar on. It's only when I do that I realise what is really going on. As I slide in behind the patient, I can see the back of her head, something I will never be able to unsee. Looking at the back of her head, I see a grapefruit-sized hole. With my flashlights, I look at the hole and it's almost empty, except for a large piece of skull that is floating on top of a blood and brains soup. I look up, and on the headline of the vehicle is a 2-foot diameter halo of blood and brain printed above her, with tiny pieces of skull stuck into the fabric. I look back at the hole. It's a chilly night, so I can see heat vapors coming out of the hole, similar to how you'll be able to see your breath on a cold day. I look at the vehicle and my partner and I say, "We need to go now." Either the look on my face or the sense caused him to peek inside the vehicle and see what I was seeing. His eyes grew wide and all he said was, "Holy shit." Our EMT FTO quickly went to the ambulance and grabbed the stretcher from the backboard. Up until this point, we were taking our time carefully getting out of the vehicle, but now, carefully and slowly, turned into just get her out of the vehicle. Our EMT also grabbed me a few large trauma dressing and gauze wrap. I placed the trauma dressing over the hole and wrapped the ever-living shit out of it around her head so that when we moved her onto the stretcher, nothing would spill out. With the help of the fire department and police, we moved the woman onto the backboard and put her on the stretcher. The whole time, the husband has been standing at the front of the vehicle watching, not understanding what's happened. As we get the woman on the stretcher, he comes over and I can see he now has tears in his face. He bends down, kisses her on the cheek and says, "I love you." We quickly get the woman in the ambulance. Due to the woman's injury, the cerebrum, largest part of the brain, is almost completely gone, meaning she has no motor function, no muscle tone, and no cognitive abilities. Her brainstem, however, is still intact. The bullet missed it. The brainstem controls the body's autonomic functions, like respiratory rate, heart rate, and blood pressure. Due to this, when we moved the woman to the stretcher, her tongue fell against the back of her oral airway, causing a blockage. I knew immediately this was going to happen, so I had my partner set up the intubation supplies for me. In the ambulance, I placed the laryngoscope bladed device used in intubation into the patient's mouth to move her jaw and tongue forward, opening her airway. I see the hole on the roof of the woman's mouth. I slide the endotracheal tube through the woman's vocal cords and into her trachea. This gives us a secured airway so we can ventilate the patients. My partner uses an intraosseous needle to obtain vascular access. Just the same thing as an IV, but it goes into the bone, and medication and fluids are absorbed by the bone marrow. I placed the PT on the cardiac monitor, check her blood pressure and oxygen. At the time, I thought it was the strangest thing. Her blood pressure was actually good. Her heart rate was normal, her oxygen was good, and her cardiac rhythm was normal. We start transporting emergent to the hospital, and I give them a heads up activating the trauma team. After the call, we went back to the station to restock the ambulance and clean up. That's when I saw all the bits of bone and blood on my pants and shirt. Luckily, the charge medic let me go home and take a shower and put on a new pair of clothes. After I changed, I went back to work, and the rest of the shift was uneventful. I learned the next morning around 9 AM, the family had decided to remove life support, and the woman passed away. For many years after the call, I didn't notice a change. I kept doing what I do best, and never really thought I'd been affected by it all, until I realised I was. A couple of years ago, I had a bad relationship that made me start thinking about myself and how I am. It was something that was always there, but I never really thought anything about it. I just thought it was my personality and who I developed into as an adult. I realised how angry I was. I was not a mean person, but very simple, stupid things would set me off, and I had a bad temper. I was very cynical to the world, I still am. And what I thought was a stomach problem, I started thinking maybe it's anxiety. I started that I want to figure out what caused me to be this way. I wanted to figure out why I think the way I do, why I act the way I do. So, I decided to see a psychologist. After many months' visits, my psychologist came up with a PTSD diagnosis. I hated it at the time. I hated being characterized as someone with PTSD. It didn't make sense. I can handle anything. Nothing bothers me. But during those visits, as we conversed, the one thing that kept coming up was that call. I didn't realize how much it actually affected me. How much of a wall that I'd built to shut everyone else and not see who I really am, to protect myself. The more I thought about it, the more I came to realize that it probably makes sense. The reason I tell the story the way I do, with the graphic detail, is because I think everyone needs to understand it in its entirety. And mental health not only affects a single person, but everyone around them. Like I say, I'm not going to get preachy, so if you don't want to read past this, I understand, but I urge you to. This is something we talk about at work quite a lot, and there are several co-workers on the ambulance even now that I talk about with this stuff. One of, if not the number one cause of death in first responders is suicide. If you are someone who has thought about or attempted suicide in the past, you need to know that taking your life doesn't only affect you. You may think it will be better this way, but I assure you, it will not. People often say how selfish suicide is, and it's true. Because once you're gone, you have no idea the amount of lives that have been impacted by you. If you don't think this is true or that no one will care, maybe you need to go back and reread the story, because I guarantee people care. I care. So find someone, anyone, just to talk to. Be honest, let them know how you're feeling. I know it's hard. It was for me, but it does get better. You just have to try. So if anyone you know or does struggle with mental health issues, reach out. Just be an ear. You don't have to try and solve the problem, but just listen. If you listen, you may just hear something that can help save someone's life. And if you struggle with mental health issues and think there's no one for you to talk to, you're wrong. It can be a professional. It can be a person you consider a close friend or a relative. If you feel like none of these options work for you, or that you're considering doing something dangerous, go to your local emergency room. Call 911 because that's what they're all there for. Police, fire, EMS, ER staff. People may not think of these people to call when you're having a mental emergency, but I can tell you firsthand that we deal with this a lot more than you think. And we are trained in how to deal with people in these situations. All of us. Even if you don't know what to say. If you even just make the call, it will get things started, and hopefully you'll find the help you deserve.